Fall of 2024 was a big transition for me. After years of living in a loud, crowded city, I decided to take a short teaching job in Vienna, Austria. I rented an old apartment in a district called Neubau. The place felt ancient, high ceilings, tall windows, and wooden floors that creaked with every step, like something from the 19th century. It was a damp, cold Tuesday night when I got the keys from the property agent. I spent hours carrying my stuff inside. I didn't rent a van, just took a few taxis with some big suitcases. By around 7 p.m., everything was finally inside, scattered all over the main room. Just a few boxes of books, my suitcases, and a big backpack. I was exhausted, not just from moving, but from all the paperwork and bureaucracy that came with settling in a new country. I decided to leave the unpacking for tomorrow. I only took out my tablet and a pair of wireless headphones. I plugged in a small desk lamp I'd brought and set it in the far corner, creating a small circle of light in the otherwise dark room. I started a German movie on a streaming app, trying to get used to the language, and lay down on my sleeping bag on the floor. Around 8:15, during a quiet part of the movie, I felt like something wasn't right. The sound didn't come from inside, it came from outside. It was the sound of gravel shifting and a faint metallic creak. My apartment was on a raised ground floor, with large windows facing a small walled garden in the back. I took off my headphones. The sound continued, scraping, dragging, like someone was pulling a metal ladder across the gravel, or scratching against the brick wall. I crawled toward one of the windows. The curtains were thick and heavy, typical for those old European buildings. I pulled the edge just slightly to peek through. Through that narrow gap, I saw movement. Under the faint glow of a garden lamp, a shadow shifted, too tall and too solid to be a plant. Then I saw them, a pair of thick boots standing on the window ledge of the neighboring apartment, which I knew was empty. My breath caught. I couldn't see a face, but the shadow clearly belonged to someone trying to get a foothold on that stone ledge. Then, the movement stopped. Everything went still again. I went back to my sleeping bag. My heart was pounding. I told myself it was probably just a worker doing some late repair, or maybe a security guy checking the building. Old places like this always needed maintenance. I tried to focus back on the movie, but every creak in the floor made me flinch. I finally gave in to sleep around 11:30, promising myself I'd check that window in the morning. I woke up freezing. My tablet said it was 3:45 a.m. The room was pitch dark, except for the faint blue glow of the digital clock. Then I heard it, a soft, steady sound. It came from the hallway that connected the main room to the bathroom and storage area. It was the sound of bare feet on the old oak floor. Light steps, careful, but real. I opened my eyes wide but didn't move. I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep. The footsteps stopped. Silence again, but not an empty silence. It felt heavy, like someone else was there, standing still, watching. I slowly shifted my eyes toward the hallway doorway. It was the darkest spot in the apartment, far from the streetlight outside. But there, in that darkness, I could make out a faint silhouette. A woman. She was standing there. Her hair was long and dark, partly covering her face. She wore something thin and pale, like an old nightgown. She didn't move. She just stood there facing me. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could feel her looking straight at me. That moment felt endless, like I was underwater, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, she slowly lifted her left hand and pointed, directly at one of the boxes of books stacked beside my head. And without a word, she turned around and ran off down the hallway, barefoot. A second later, another sound. Not from the hallway, but from the far side of the apartment. Glass shifting. Then a small thud. It came from the storage room, the small bedroom I was using to keep my extra stuff. Then, silence again. I jumped up, grabbed my phone, and called the police, mixing English and broken German, barely able to speak. "Someone's in here." She was just here, in the hallway, looking at me. While I talked, I turned on every light in the apartment and ran toward the hallway and the storage room. That's when I saw it. On the old wooden floor, right where those bare feet had been, there were marks. Not dirt, not water, but thin, black oil, like the kind from a machine or a car. The footprints started at the small storage room window, crossed the hallway, paused near the main door, then disappeared back toward the storage room. The police arrived within minutes. They searched every corner. The window in the storage room, the only one in that part of the apartment, was locked from the inside. But it was very old, with an antique latch. The officers explained that with the right tool, someone could unlock and relock it from the outside without breaking anything. What was strange was that nothing was missing, not a single thing. In that storage room, I had 2 suitcases, a large box of cables, and some tools. None of it had been touched. Except, one of the suitcases had been moved slightly from where I left it. The police took samples of the oily footprints but couldn't find any clear explanation. "This is unusual," one of them, Officer Miller, said. "They didn't steal anything. They didn't break anything. They just came in, looked around, and left." I told them about the movement in the garden and the woman pointing at the box of books. Miller wrote it down with a skeptical look. "Sounds like she wasn't here to rob you," he said. "Maybe she was searching for something. And maybe she found it." I never went back to that apartment. I packed my things the next morning, stayed in a hotel for 2 weeks, and then moved into a modern high-rise with 24-hour security. It's been a year now, and I still don't know who she was, why she didn't take anything, or why she pointed at that box of books. All I know is that one cold night in Vienna, I shared the same air with someone who, for reasons I'll never understand, had been watching me. Let me start from the beginning. This happened in mid-October, about a month after I moved to a cabin at the foothills of Boulder, Colorado. I bought this old wooden cabin, decades old, as a quiet escape from everything. And yeah, I got the peace I wanted, but there was a price. That price was paranoia. One thing that always bothered me was the basement. It was dirty, unfinished, and the heavy wooden door never closed all the way. There was always this 2-inch gap along the bottom, like a black slit where anything could be watching. During the first week, the weird stuff started happening, but I convinced myself it was just exhaustion. I'm a really organized guy, but suddenly I started forgetting things. My instant coffee, for example. I clearly remember filling the glass jar to the top, but within days, the amount dropped way faster than it should have. I even started measuring my water, thinking maybe I was using too much. I was trying so hard to be logical. And then there was the blanket. Every morning I folded my thick blanket neatly on the back of the sofa. But 3 days in a row, I found it laid out flat on the floor, like someone had been sleeping there. I tried to excuse it. Maybe I did it in my sleep. Yeah, a pathetic justification, but it was easier than accepting any other explanation. The suspicion didn't go away. I started running little tests, daily audits of the house. I placed a coin on the back doormat. The next morning, it was gone. Wind, I told myself. Even though there hadn't been any wind. I tried again, this time with a little piece of paper wedged at the bottom of the basement door. The next morning, the paper hadn't moved, and I let out a relieved breath. The coin was just a coincidence, I told myself. But then something else happened. I started smelling smoke. A faint, stale cigarette smell, like old tobacco hiding in old fabric. I don't smoke, and the cabin had been professionally cleaned. The smell was never strong enough to track, but just strong enough to make me stop breathing whenever it hit. One time, I left a carton of milk on the kitchen counter. I was sure I closed the lid tightly. When I came back from the bathroom, the lid was slightly open, and floating on the surface of the milk were tiny droplets of water. That made no sense. The house was cool. It couldn't be condensation. I stared at it for a full minute, desperately looking for a logical explanation, and finding none. By the 3rd week, the discomfort had turned into literal fear. I barely slept. I kept a flashlight next to my pillow, and I woke up constantly to sounds that weren't there. One morning, a neighbor from down the hill, an older guy named Gary, came up to return mail that had been delivered to him by mistake. While we talked, he casually said, "Good to see the lights on. I've seen someone walking around near your property a few times. Guy in a gray jacket." Looks like he's waiting for something. That hit me like an ice block to the chest. It wasn't paranoia, it was real. Later that afternoon, I was trimming branches on the property. When I looked up, I saw him. Behind the wire fence, half hidden between the tall juniper bushes. A man wearing that same worn gray hoodie. He was crouched down, hands resting on his knees, completely still. When I held up the saw, he looked right at me. His eyes were tired but sharp, focused. Once he realized I saw him, he stood up slowly and walked into the woods. Never looked back. The way he moved, it wasn't random, it wasn't confused. He knew exactly where he was going and exactly how to get back. I spent the rest of the afternoon installing new locks. I felt safe for maybe an hour. On the fourth night of that week, I was making dinner. It was around 8:30 p.m. I felt so tense I didn't even play music. I wanted to hear the house. Then suddenly, everything went dark. Living room, kitchen, all lights. Gone. I knew it was the breaker, and I knew that meant I had to go into the basement. Instant clarity hit me. This wasn't an accident. It was an invitation. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the drawer, gripping it so tight my knuckles went numb. I unlocked the basement door and pulled the heavy wood open. The smell that came out, damp dirt, mold, and something sour, like unwashed skin, made me gag. I started going down. The narrow concrete path between stacks of firewood felt like a tunnel. I pointed the flashlight ahead. When I reached the breaker box and crouched down, I heard it. Not footsteps, not scraping. A sound far worse, dripping water. In a place that shouldn't be wet. I turned off my flashlight. If he was here, I didn't want him seeing me. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I stood still, listening to the dripping and the silence swallowing the room. I turned the flashlight back on and slowly aimed it toward the narrow gap between the old furnace and the concrete wall. The beam landed on something. There, in a cramped, hollow space, was a makeshift bedding, layers of cardboard, a thin sleeping bag, and a pile of old paperback books. And sitting cross-legged in front of it, half-faced toward the furnace, was the man. His gray hoodie covered part of his face. His dirty hands held a small piece of wood like it was a weapon. He opened his eyes and stared directly into the beam. His look was cold, not scared, not angry, possessive, like I was the one trespassing. "I'm sleeping," he said, voice low and raspy, annoyed that I woke him up. Silence stretched forever. All I could hear was the dead furnace and my shaky breathing. I didn't move. He didn't move. We just stared at each other in that narrow cone of light. I stepped back, slow, never breaking eye contact. When I reached the stairs, I turned and ran. I slammed the basement door shut, locked it, and dragged an old armchair in front of it like some kind of barricade. I called the police, shaking uncontrollably. 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars arrived. They went into the basement, and of course, the man was gone. He left the bedding, some empty snack wrappers, and water bottles. But the sergeant came back out holding one thing that made my blood run cold. A slightly rusted key. A copy of my front door key. The police said he was probably a hidden tenant, someone who sneaks into newly purchased houses during the time between the sale and the move-in. They live there in secret, coming and going only at night to get food and water. I moved out the next morning, sold the cabin back to the agent at a huge loss, never went back. The worst part wasn't the fear of violence. It was realizing that for almost a month I shared my life, my sleep, my coffee, with a stranger who moved silently through my home. He had the key. He could enter any time he wanted. He wasn't hiding under my floor. He was the real owner of the house. And knowing he chose to stay, just watching, that was the most horrifying part of all. It was early September, a few months after I graduated college. I was 23 and supposed to be starting my career, but in reality, I was working double shifts at a used bookstore in downtown Portland, Oregon, and crashing on an air mattress in an old friend's apartment. My savings were running out fast. Looking at average studio rents in the city made me feel sick. I knew the only way to survive was to find a roommate, any roommate, just to split the costs and hang on a little longer in Portland. Desperation pushed me to scroll through sketchy rental ads online, even though I knew how bad that could go. I sent out dozens of messages. Most of them never got a reply, and the ones that did were obvious scams. Then I came across this short ad from a guy named Caleb. It was simple, straight to the point, looking for a roommate to share a one-bedroom apartment in Southeast Tabor. The area was quiet, and the rent was way below market. That should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. I replied right away, wrote something polite and professional. Caleb answered almost instantly and called me that same night. His voice was flat, emotionless, though he said he was also a recent grad. The ad only had one photo, a glimpse of an old, worn-out kitchen, but the cheap rent made me overlook everything else. I convinced myself it was fine. We met the next day. The place was on the ground floor of an old wooden building with peeling paint and a dim, narrow hallway. As we walked through, I noticed everything. The creaky floorboards, the musty air. Caleb looked ordinary. Messy black hair, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He told me he already took the only bedroom, so the living room, which doubled as a dining area, would be mine. The carpet was stained, the single bathroom was tiny, and the air smelled permanently damp. But I needed a place, so I said yes. I moved in at the start of September. At first, things were fine. Caleb didn't talk much, but he made small talk sometimes. College, work, that kind of thing. It was actually kind of nice having someone else around. We were both just trying to make it. To give me some privacy, Caleb set up one of those cheap folding room dividers in the middle of the living room. Thin fabric stretched over a wooden frame. It didn't block sound, but it created the illusion of space. My side had the couch that doubled as my bed. We fell into a quiet routine. He'd leave early every morning and come home late at night. That divider became a wall between our lives. I kept quiet, tried not to make noise, not to bother him. The place was dark and smelled like old carpet, but it was shelter. After 2 weeks, I'd gotten used to the sound of Caleb's footsteps and could finally sleep through the night. Then one night, around 2:45 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the front door unlocking. It was sharp, echoing in the stillness. I shifted slightly and saw Caleb step inside. He was wearing a dark jacket, jeans, and black gloves. That froze me. He looked straight at the lump of blankets where I was lying. I kept my eyes shut, breathing slow, pretending to be asleep. He walked past me, into his room behind the divider. Then I heard it, a deep thump, and the heavy scrape of something big being dragged. He stayed in his room for maybe a minute. Then the door opened again. He came out, stopped at the front door, and just stood there, facing me. The only light came from the street lamp outside, casting a faint glow across the room. He stared at the blankets covering me, long enough for my skin to crawl. His expression was blank, like he wasn't looking at a person, just a thing. Then he turned, quietly stepped out, and closed the door with this soft, careful click. My stomach twisted. I couldn't sleep. A few minutes later, maybe 4, maybe 5, the door opened again. I squeezed my eyes shut tight. Caleb came back in, and this time I heard his breathing. Heavy, strained, like he was carrying something. His footsteps moved slowly across the carpet. I risked opening my eyes just a little. In the dim light, I saw him carrying something big and long, something that looked unmistakably like a human body, wrapped tight in thick plastic. It hung limp over his shoulder. I caught a glimpse of pale fabric underneath. My breath caught in my throat. He moved quickly into his room and slammed the door. I just lay there, drenched in cold sweat, trying to think of something, anything that made sense. A mannequin? Something for his job? Number? Nothing explained that sound or that weight. From behind his door, I heard shuffling, scraping, the rip of tape, heavy, deliberate sounds. Fear took over. I couldn't pretend anymore. I slid off the couch and crept toward his door. My hands were shaking. I knocked softly. Everything went silent inside. The longest silence of my life. Then, footsteps. The lock turned. Caleb cracked the door open just enough for me to see one of his eyes. He spoke quickly, nervously. "Sorry, just moving some project supplies I bought," he said. His tone was too high, too fake. I couldn't stop myself. "What were you carrying earlier? Was that a person?" His fake smile vanished. His face went stiff, hard. The silence that followed felt like pressure. Then, without thinking, I threw my shoulder into the door. It hit him square, forcing it open. Caleb stumbled back with a low grunt. The dim light from a desk lamp filled the room, and there, in the corner, wrapped tightly in clear plastic, was the body of a young woman. Her face was pale and still, sticking out from the wrapping. Peaceful. Dead. He shoved me out with terrifying strength and slammed the door, locking it fast. But I'd already seen enough. I ran. I didn't grab a thing. Not my bag, not my phone charger, just my phone and the apartment key. I bolted out the door, down the hall, out into the street. I called 911 as soon as my feet hit the pavement, blurting out the address and what I saw. The dispatcher didn't believe me at first. Caleb didn't fight when the police arrived. They found him sitting calmly on the couch in his room, like nothing had happened. The woman was dead, and the details of who she was were kept private. It turned out Caleb had lied about everything. He wasn't a recent grad. He was 35, with some kind of hidden past. He never explained what he was doing with her. I still think about that night. I got out alive, and I know how lucky that makes me. But I keep wondering, if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't opened that door, would anyone have ever found me? Now, every creak, every door closing at night, it all takes me back to that apartment, and to the sound of his heavy breathing in the dark.